Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second course of the Help Put Back the Missing Pieces campaign that we've started. And today's lesson is going to be very science-based, so you might feel like there's a little too much information. You might feel like, okay, this is interesting. You'll basically find out the scientific aspects of autism. And at the end of the meeting, we'll have time for questions, which I'm sure will pop up. So don't worry about that. Just write them down and feel afraid to ask. And we'll start again with a presentation of who's going to be the speakers of this meeting. And we'll start with myself. My name is Tarek Khatib. I'm co-founder and president of Alas. And I'll pass it on to Nidia.
Hi everyone, as many of you know, my name is Nidia and I'm also the co-founder and president of Alas. And I'm really happy for all of you to be here.
Hi, my name is Fabio Silva. I'm the Vice President of ALAS, and thanks for all of you for being here.
Hi, my name is Andresa Casa, and I am the treasurer of the club. And it's really nice to see you all here again and some new faces, hopefully.
Hi, my name is Minji Kwak, and I'm the secretary of ALAS, and I hope you can enjoy this presentation.
Hello, my name is Sharon Lee and I help manage social media. Nice to meet everyone.
So hello, my name is Jorge Sacasa and I'm a member of ALAS, and I'm excited to present this presentation with all of you.
I think we can get started. Thank you so much for being here and we hope you enjoy this presentation. If you have any questions, you can also put them in the chat box and we'll try to answer them throughout the presentation or at the end.
So remember last week, our first course, we talked about the overview and signs or symptoms of autism spectrum disorder. So if any of you remember what autism is, you can just put it in the chat box or of course unmute of what autism is.
I know we have one of our members, one of our most involved members here. Camila, would you like to tell us what you think autism is?
Sure, right now I'm a little bit tired, but autism, first of all, is when a person is under the spectrum of autism. It's important to know that because you cannot say that a person is autistic if it's a person under the spectrum, and this person can have huge abilities in math, music, and stuff, but what the person has struggled with is interacting socially. They see life in a different perspective through a different lens, but that doesn't make them different.
Well, thanks, Camila. And yeah, you're right. Autism, also known as autism spectrum disorder (ASD), is a developmental disorder that affects communication and behavior. And people with ASD tend to show several symptoms. For example, difficulty with communication and interaction with other people, also restricted interest and repetitive behaviors, and they can also show symptoms that can hurt the person's ability to function properly in school, work, other areas of life, and social environments. And as Camila said, they also perform greatly in other aspects, for example, music, art, and mathematics. And yeah.
Maite in the chat box also contributed, and we wanted to highlight it as well. She said that autism is a condition that causes certain people to see and experience the world in a different way than most of us. And yes, that is exactly the concept that we want you to have. It's a different way of experiencing the world that comes with certain difficulties and certain strengths as well. So thank you for all of your guys' participation. Now for this course, we're going to focus on the causes and the risk factors of autism. And risk factors are things that may increase the risk or decrease the risk of an individual having autism spectrum disorder. And the causes, there isn't any known cause, but we can explore the different hypotheses or the different theories that have been thrown around throughout history.
So first of all, why puzzles? Well, the puzzle pattern represents the complexity of the autism spectrum, and the color and shapes represents the diversity of the people and families living with this condition. As some of you may know, our campaign's name is Help Put Back the Missing Pieces because autism is still unknown. The cause of autism is still unknown, as well as some existence of a cure. However, there's some speculations on possible causes and risk factors.
Thank you, Jorge. So, this is a timeline that we created to address how the views of the causes of autism have changed throughout time, because this isn't something that we really have a lot of information on. Like Jorge said, autism is kind of a mystery because we don't know what causes it. There isn't any identifiable cure, but it's the views of its causes have changed throughout history. First of all, in the 1940s, it was considered a rare child psychosis that was characterized by having trouble relating to other people. And there was this thing called the refrigerator mother theory, in which they predicted that what caused autism wasn't actually a biological condition, but it was that harsh parents and cold parents actually made an individual have trouble relating to other individuals, and that was the cause of autism. Obviously, this has been disproven throughout history, but it it was a very prevalent theory in the 1940s. In the 1960s, the an American psychologist, and he was also the dad of a child under the spectrum of autism called Bernard Rimland, he proposed for the first time, because nobody had ever said it before, that autism was a biological condition. Before, people attributed it to bad parenting, but can you please? But it was actually for the first time that they proposed that it was a condition, a disorder. And he proposed, Rimland, that it was caused by environmental toxins. So that the environment in which the individual was in, its toxicity or the different um, factors in it, caused the individual to be under the spectrum of autism. Then in the 1980s, there was an increase in research for the genetic causes of autism. Many people started thinking, okay, maybe there's a specific gene because it seems to run in families. So maybe there's a specific gene that causes autism, but they weren't able to identify any specific genes. Then in the 1990s, there was more research for link with mumps, the rubella, and the measles vaccine. And here there was a lot of controversy because a lot of people thought that autism was caused by vaccines. And it was a big protest, and a lot of individuals stopped taking vaccines because they thought that they were going to get autism, or that individuals or children were going to get autism from the vaccines. But a lot of population-based research shows that these claims are invalid. In fact, the initial research paper that incited and sparked the controversy was retracted because of improper methods. However, throughout history, we've seen that vaccines don't cause autism in in and we will dive deeper in detail of vaccines relation to autism in more in the presentation. So what do we know today? What have we discovered, and how much have we progressed in research regarding autism?
So nowadays, many research are being done for entire genomes in which scientists are looking for genes that cause autism. But there hasn't been a specific gene found yet, as Nadia mentioned before. Nevertheless, experts do agree that there is a neurological basis to autism. This is because in multiple investigations, such as postmortem autopsies, there was demonstrated a absence or loss of Purkin gene cells in the brain. Usually, these cells are part of a typical human brain. Also, in electrophysiology studies, people with ASD perform atypical electrical activities when they were asked to do various tasks.
So in the present, we think that autism is related to two causes. There isn't definitive proof for either of these factors, but there is a lot of research supporting it. So these factors are the genes and the environmental factors. If we take a look at genetics, we know that ASD tends to run in families. So if a parent has autism, then it is much more likely that the child will. And also, certain families seem to have more people with autism, so there appears to be a genetic link there. And there are different genes that appear to be involved. Scientists are looking at big genotypes. They're trying to find genes that work together that cause autism. However, the research in that field is still occurring and the information is limited. Autism also seems to be associated with genetic syndromes such as Rett syndrome or Fragile X syndrome. So, when an individual has one of these syndromes, it is much more likely that they are under the autism spectrum disorder. Then there's also the inheritance of genetic mutations, which means that the individual may inherit genetic mutations that make them more susceptible to having autism spectrum disorder, or genetic mutations that occur spontaneously when they are an early embryo or in gametes before the embryo is formed. It is important, very important, to note that these factors increase the risk, but they do not guarantee autism spectrum disorder. So this is the reason why these are called risk factors.
On the other hand, scientists are also looking at environmental factors as they also may increase or reduce the risk of an individual developing autism spectrum disorder, especially for those who are already genetically predisposed to. However, it is important to note that this may only be a small increase or decrease in risk for the offspring to develop autism spectrum disorder. So just for being exposed to these factors does not mean that an offspring is guaranteed to be born with ASD. And researchers are exploring and looking into factors such as viral infections, medications or complications during pregnancy, and air pollutants. And in regards to viral infections and air pollutants, scientists are researching in statistically based ways to see if there's a correlation between them and the development of ASD.
Besides genetics and environment, there are also other risk factors that may increase and also decrease the risk of having ASD. For example, those that increase the risk are the advanced age of parents. Also, as you can recall from the last presentation, boys are 4 times more likely to be born with under the spectrum of autism than girls. Therefore, the sex of of the child also has an impact. Also, pregnancies that are separated by less than a year, and also for preterm babies, which are the ones that are born before 26 weeks of gestation. There are also other risk factors that decrease the risk. For example, taking prenatal vitamins that include folic acid before pregnancy, during conception, and also during the pregnancy. It's important to remember that these factors only increase or decrease the chances of being born with ASD. That does not mean that ASD is guaranteed.
Okay, so going back to the vaccine controversy, which is what Neil was talking about in the timeline, which is something that has come up a little bit recently, and that is, and you've probably heard about this before, even before this presentation. And first of all, we need to understand that family experiences differ, meaning that and for every single family that a kid was diagnosed when they were 2 years old or 3 years old, the experiences differ. And a lot of times what happens is a kid is diagnosed with autism during the time or a little bit after they got their vaccine. So that's why there was this sort of like correlation going on, and people are thinking, well, this happened after the vaccine, so did the vaccine cause this? And so basically there was a whole study that was trying to prove this, but there was no actual data which represented or actually stated, yeah, as a matter of fact, this for a fact causes autism. So as of right now, we believe that no, vaccines don't cause autism because there's no actual statistical data, or there's no actual facts that say, yeah, for a matter of fact, this does cause autism. And also, we can even say that the original study was absolutely like totally retracted. So it's not even a study that is currently like under review. And it's really important to understand this because not vaccinating a child could cause him or put her and him in danger of catching threatening diseases. So if you see someone who thinks, oh, okay, so if I don't vaccinate my kid, then I don't have to. There's no way they're gonna in any way be under the spectrum of autism. That you might want to stop this, because that's what could end up happening is just a lot of horrible things, such as them catching diseases such as the ones we listed here. If you're interested in different case studies or want to go more in depth of older and newer case studies, we put the links for those case studies in the next slide. And if you're interested in these, you can send us an email and we'll send you or the slides so that you are able to read them.
So in order to explain a little bit better or easier what for you to understand better what Tarek just explained and Nidhi explained previously, we created a timeline with the recommended vaccine schedules and the red flags or signs that parents usually notice in their child. So as we can see, the first dose of vaccines are given to a baby between the first and the second month. Then we have a second dose at 4 months. And as we can see in this doses, usually there are no signs noticed yet until the third dose, when at 6 months, when usually parents notice that there are no big smiles or warm or joyful expressions. Then by 9 months, we have no back and forth sharing of sounds, smiles, or other facial expressions. And by 12 months, there are no response to a name. The baby does not respond to his or her name. There are no communication gestures such as pointing out things or moving their hands because they want to be carried or things like that. Also, there's no baby talk yet. And then between the fourth dose, which is between the 15th and 18th month, the child does not speak certain words yet or at all. So as we can see, because it is until the third or second dose of vaccines that signs start to appear, it was believed that they cause autism, when in reality, as mentioned before, vaccines do not cause autism.
And I just wanted to clarify for the vaccine controversy, these are the common symptoms would that could characterize an individual on the spectrum of autism's journey. But in reality, these symptoms may develop differently, and for an individual with autism, you know that there's a spectrum, so they may be very different in their variety, and they also may have like very different impacts. Each individual with autism has a different journey. So these are just like standards that we try to use to illustrate the idea that the vaccines correlate in a sense with the the average time in which an individual starts exposing signs of autism and symptoms. So that's where the controversy came from. And if, like Tarek said, if you are interested in learning more or seeing the research studies, in the next slide, we have the bibliography, and we have a lot of research studies that definitely prove that vaccines don't cause autism. And I think we even have the original study that was retracted. So you can check it out as well to be as objective as possible. So thank you for your time. We actually covered a lot of content in a like very few time. So I would assume that there are some questions, but if there aren't, we can proceed. But if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box, or you can unmute, or any comments in general as well.
I'm curious. Sorry, I can't see myself on the screen. Can you guys hear me? There we go.
Yes, we can hear you, Miss.
Thanks. I'm sorry I was a little bit late. I virtually ran from one meeting to another. But I wanted to just thank you guys once more for hosting these. I think it's crucial to be informed as a community. I had a question actually, since I came in a little late, so I don't know if anybody else was talking about vaccines, but since I see that Tarek, you were talking about them, are there, because there's a variety of vaccines, right, that young children get or babies get. Every time I hear kind of like the vaccination controversy, are there any specific ones that have been associated or have been falsely associated? Or is it just like your routine, like newborn vaccinations?
So apart from the like routine, I believe there's other ones, not just the ones like as soon as you're born. I believe there are other ones that come in later. I wouldn't be able to tell you the exact name because I'd be lying because I don't know the exact names. But yes, I believe there are the ones after, not just as soon as you're born, the vaccines are, but there's the ones after. That's why we talked about the correlation. So we
Yeah.
talked about how it's around the same time, right? So it's around the same time that you get the vaccine, and then they start noticing, and they're like, okay, so what's going on here? And then they end up getting diagnosed with autism, right? And so there, it's because of that it's sort of like I could see how it might spark the interest of someone, or it might say like, well, this makes sense now, doesn't it? And mostly if there's a lot of kids who end up having the same thing. Well, after my kid got vaccinated, he also started presenting um, certain signs that he did have autism or he was under the spectrum. So that's why we talked about
Yeah.
what's it called the
Correct.
correlation. Yeah.
And it makes sense. I mean, because I'm sure I'm just curious because then there's those early warning signs, right, that you see in those first months, like you guys put together in that correlation. But you also have the case, as this was my own personal case, that the symptoms didn't present themselves at first, but rather kind of in regression at around age 2. So things that my son was able to do then didn't, and so it's a dangerous kind of line to walk down because the vaccinations we know keep people safe. So when they erroneously kind of line up with milestones that kids are supposed to present, I can see that. But I was just curious if there was any specific one
We mentioned this in the
I put
timeline.
one in the chat box.
in the
Well,
chat box. Great.
the actual timeline, we also discussed, I don't know if you were here by then, that we discussed the timeline of the causes. But what sparked the controversy initially was the measles, the mumps, and the rubella vaccine, because these were the ones that were firstly associated.
Yeah,
But yeah, there it is. So
got it. I missed that one. Sorry.
no,
Must
don't
be
but
covered.
those were the main vaccines that sparked the controversy at the beginning, but then other vaccines were also associated after. And I think Tarek mentioned another one in the chat as well.
Yeah, I saw that one, the cocktail one. Thank you guys
No,
for providing that extra information.
thank you. Does anybody else have other questions or like a comment? Mhm. Okay, so if nobody else has any other questions, and you can stick around after we finish the presentation and you can ask it if you want to ask it more in private or something. But we really appreciate you guys being here. It really means a lot. We're going to have our next presentation and our next course next Wednesday at the same time. So wait, I think we have a question in the chat. In your opinion, what is the biggest misconception of ASD? Well, personally, in my opinion, I think it would have to be the vaccine controversy itself, because it has been very dangerous throughout time, and not vaccinating children can be very dangerous for them, making them vulnerable to other diseases such as measles, and I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions in the scientific sense. I would also say that one of the biggest misconceptions, but this is very much in the social aspect, is that you can't have a conversation with a person with autism, or you can't be their friend. And I've noticed that people really think that sometimes, and you have to bust that myth that you can actually be friends with a person with autism, and actually they're amazing people that you may learn a lot from. So I think that's another myth that is like a kind of outside the scope of this presentation, and I think we're going to focus on that aspect much more in the next two that are coming up. But I think that's a great question.
Personally, I would say that I would think it's the misconception, in which actually I think this is the misconception that Nidia and I were like, we decided, okay, let's start the club. Being on the spectrum of autism equals to not being intelligent. So that's what a lot of people who use the word in a sort of like an offensive matter, they're like, okay, you're not smart. It's equals to not being smart. That's how a lot of people associate it, and that's why Nidia and I oftenly talk about the fact that there's a lot of people who are under the spectrum and have way above average IQs. And that's something that we always, I think, we probably presented that in the first presentation. I think we did put that as a fact. And so I think that would be for me the biggest both social and scientific misconception that there is about ASD.
Completely agreed. That is also very common. And that is something we have to be aware of, especially as members of our community. Sometimes there have been some inappropriate comments that can be made about autism, and you can really contradict those myths that are being made. And now that you have this knowledge as well, you can actually clarify and make the individual or the person who's making the joke, maybe relating autism to being unintelligent, you can actually tell them, well, that joke is unintelligent of itself, you can say, because that it's actually the opposite is actually true, you can say. But thank you, Henry. That was a great question as well. And if anybody else has any
Thank you.
I have another question. What would you guys say as leaders of a club that has, made great strides in debunking a lot of myths and informing our community? Since you've got some school leaders here, you've got our ear. What do you think? What do you think we need to do as a school community to, become more inclusive? Like, what do you think would be something that would be impactful? I mean, your organization and your education of the community is certainly a foundational part of it. But if you could look at, our curriculum, the way the school is set up, what would be your wish list?
Well, I think I can answer this question and anybody can add on if they want to. But since the start of ALAS, we tried to devise a plan, a strategy timeline. That's the way we called it, because we wanted to see how could we make the ANS community, starting with the ANS community, then we're trying to spread out right now. But we were trying to see how can we make this a more inclusive environment, a more knowledgeable environment regarding the topic of autism. And I remember that we started our presentations and started creating awareness through the youngest members of our community. And we thought maybe the youngest members, it may be hard to actually explain it to them, but it was actually, it was, for us, it was amazing because it was extremely heartwarming. They were so open to learn and they understood it much better than I think most of the individuals that may be older or something, but if they don't know about autism, they understood it so well. So I think the first step, and something that we focused on so much, is educating and understanding. And that was our main focus, and it is one of our main goals as a club. And making sure that our community and ANS members as a whole, where it is students, staff members, teachers, or parents, that they are understanding what autism spectrum disorder is. And we've been able to do that a lot through different parts of the community. We still have a long way to go, but we've been able to do that through many presentations, and we're still working on being even more effective on that aspect. And that's one of the main things that we focus on, because I think that's the first step to actually have a more inclusive community. Then once you understand what we're talking about, what autism spectrum disorder is, there was this campaign that we did the first or second year of our club, called Amazing Things Can Happen. And it was all focused on what can you do as an individual to help children with autism. And it was the main focus of the campaign is that you can be a superhero. And kids loved this idea because they thought, oh my God, how can I be a superhero? But saying that just by understanding, you can help the child that is next to you if you see that something is bothering them. And once they were able to understand, we actually got some information that they were actually doing the stuff that we told us and that we told them, and that was amazing for us. That if you see a child, we told them that is being bothered by the light or the sound, or if they're doing this, try to be their friend, try to help them deal with the sensory. Tell the teacher, please lower the volume. He's being bothered by it. And it's amazing that we've seen results from that, because the kids are being much more accepting. And I think that's the transgression that we're trying to to accomplish here, educating and then putting in practice what we've learned at the individual level. I don't know if the curriculum has to be honestly, I think that by having these different campaigns and by communicating this way through to the different members of our community, we've been able to do a lot of awareness in that sense. But I think that that could be the action plan. I don't know if anybody else has like anything else that they have an idea, but that's what as ALAS we focused on mainly. And
having that platform, right? I think maybe providing more platforms and more opportunities for you guys to be able to do that.
Yes. And for your question, that was great. Sorry that.
No problem. So myself, I also believe in always looking towards the kids and always trying to implement it more with the younger audiences, because they grow up with a certain environment, then it will always affect them in the future. So my idea is also sort of like being more inclusive, like between kids from a younger age. I don't know if other people in my club feel like this, but when I'm older, when I was in high school and stuff like that, I feel like there's more presentations and more teamwork than there is in elementary. Although in elementary, you might go and like play soccer with your friends and maybe there's teamwork there. But truth is, it's like, okay, do your multiplication test, or go do this at home with your mom. But they don't actually tell you, do this with your friends, or try to figure out ways of working as a team. It's not as common, I don't feel, in elementary as it is in high school. And then that's why you see a lot of kids who have trouble doing this in high school. They're like, I don't want to work with this person. Happens a lot. I don't want to work with this person. So I think that perhaps implementing in the system or in the curriculum, that idea of more teamwork, more let's be together, let's work together through when kids are in elementary to facilitate the teamwork when they're in high school, I think that would be very effective. And I think that that's personally, like, I think one of the best changes we could do to our curriculum.
That's really intriguing, Tarek, and I think that you're right, and we've made some first steps. When we think about like our student traits a little bit, and like being collaborative, being compassionate, being empathetic, like all of that happens when you guys work together. It doesn't happen because we teach it to you. It happens because we put you into situations where you have to bring these things out to the table. And I know that the primary school is really working already towards using these traits as a teachable tool in the classroom. And so I'm happy to take that feedback back, to the leadership team and purposefully build opportunities where you have to be inclusive. Like you have to be put into a situation to include someone, and be helped and taught how to do that well. That doesn't happen naturally, but if it happens young, then the problem doesn't become such a big problem when adolescence hits and all the other things that come along with it that complicate us when we're in middle school and we're in high school. So I appreciate both of those points, and I'm happy to have them just kind of in the forefront of my mind as we plan and build opportunities for you guys to continue doing this great work.
Thank you so much, Miss Jackie. And I don't know if anybody else has any other questions, but we, as ALAS, thank you so much for being to the second course. I just wanted to remind you that our third course, and it's almost our last one, it's the one before the last course. It's next Wednesday at the same time, and it's going to be less scientific, but it's still very interesting. So I hope that I see you guys there. And if you know anybody who would be interested, we always do like a mini review before of what we talked last time or the time before. So if you know anybody that could be interested, please let us know, or let them know that they can join the presentation and the course. Thank you so much for being here. It means a lot. Have a fantastic day and rest of your week. Thank you, Miss Augusta. That's so sweet.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.